Is the buyer on the hook for the real estate agent's commission? Well, that depends.
It does depend. So if you've been living under a rock lately, maybe you haven't heard, there has been some changes in the real estate world, right? We've got a couple major changes that have come from the NAR lawsuit. We're gonna unpack those today and go over them and give you our thoughts. So let's get into it.
Yeah, and look, we'll post some links in the description of this video so you guys can do your own independent research on the NAR lawsuit. But we want to talk about the two major changes that we've seen in our industry that are creating a lot of fear, doubt, anxiety when they were intended to create transparency for everybody. So the first major change, and this is a huge change, listing agents are no longer allowed to market the amount of commission that a seller is willing to pay to a buyer's agent for bringing their buyer to that property. To be honest with you, I don't even know if I'm allowed to even use the word commission. I feel like you have to say, what is it, concessions or compensation? Yeah. I'm honestly like, even we're confused. So let's unpack that, because literally for decades, when you were representing a buyer, when we were representing a buyer, it said, here's how much you'll get paid if you bring the buyer to this property. And now that's gone.
And now that, but before this change, that was on Zillow, that was on Redfin, that was on Trulia and Realtor.com. Everybody, including the consumer, could see what you, the buyer's agent, was getting paid.
Yep, so
that's
it was
gone.
Transparent.
Right.
And just to make sure everyone's clear, it's always been negotiable.
Always.
That number was different depending on the agent and the seller and what they had decided to do. So the whole lawsuit about like commissions were fixed and they were not transparent, that's kind of not true.
Right.
So anyway, let's talk about the different kinds of sellers out there based on this new law.
So there's gonna be three kinds of sellers. There's gonna be the one that's gonna offer a commission to an agent, a buyer's agent. There's gonna be the one that doesn't wanna offer anything at all, right? And then there's gonna be one that's gonna be willing to keep an open mind and stay flexible and focus on the net that they're gonna get, rather, because that's the most important thing for a seller, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I wanna give you guys like a very like low-level example of this, but we've got clients that we work with that are attached to their fridge, washer, and dryer, right? And you'd be surprised how many deals may explode because of these items. But a lot of times we'll meet with the seller and they'll go, look, we'll sell our house for $2 million, but we just bought the fridge, we just bought the washer and dryer, we're taking them to our new house, we don't care, they're not included. And then we'll get an offer that's out of this world, and that buyer wants the fridge, washer, and dryer. And we'll literally see the seller go, well, gosh, if they're gonna pay that much, they can have them.
Sure.
And so the seller is focusing on the big picture. So when we go back to the examples of the three different types of sellers, the one that's willing to keep an open mind and focus on the net is probably the one that's gonna win, right? If you just say no, then you might be overlooking a great offer. But if you go, well, why doesn't the buyer's agent just submit and let's negotiate? I think those are the sellers that are really gonna win.
And I wanna jump in and say one more thing. So the three types of sellers we talked about, stats and data always win in this industry, right? So if you look at who's selling for the highest amount and in the fastest amount of time, shortest amount of time, it's most of the time the ones that are enticing the most amount of buyers.
Right.
I didn't say they're offering a commission. I said they're enticing,
can you even
right?
say that word?
I don't know if I can say that.
Gosh, I hope we don't get fined.
They are enticing the most amount of buyers and incentivizing, right? It's all about incentivizing. So hint, hint.
I mean, that's sales, right? Like incentivize the salesperson to make the sale. They're gonna work harder to make the sale.
Right.
And so at any rate, look, there's a couple narratives out there right now. There are sellers that are calling us saying, hey, it's August 17th. I heard I don't have to pay commission anymore. And then we have sellers on the exact opposite side of the spectrum. I met with a client the other day. He's an old school seller. He has sold multiple properties over the last 20 years. And he knows the value of offering the incentive. And I was telling him about the new law, and he goes, hold on, Robert. He goes, so you're telling me the MLS said you can't tell the buyer's agent that I'm willing to pay a commission? And I go, yeah, if I write anywhere any amount of compensation, I'll be fined $2,500 on my first, violation, first offense. And he goes, but this is my house. And now there are lawsuits out there going around that people are saying this is a violation of people's rights to freedom of speech. Like, this is my house, I want to offer a commission. So I don't think that the lawsuits are ending with this one. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more, and we are seeing some states actually pushing back and going, we're not going to comply.
Right.
So I think we'll know a lot more over the next 6 to 12 months. But this is how we think this is going to play out.
It's no longer advertised, so buyer's agents no longer know publicly what they're going to potentially get paid.
Yep.
But we're going to discuss also here how this all is supposed to work in the new landscape between the buyer and the buyer's agent, because there's an agreement that has to be in place now to outline all of these details as well. Some agents are going to call the listing agent and just straight up ask.
Yep.
Others will just write it in the offer. And now the offer, the RPA, the Residential Purchase Agreement in California, has been updated to where there's a box to check now to say that you are asking the seller to pay. It's a separate form, one of the many.
Well,
it's a separate form that's asking the seller to pay the agent's commission.
Yep.
There's also a buyer concession section now to where...
Well, that's always been there.
Yes,
so,
it has been.
So the buyers have always had the ability to ask the seller for closing costs, right?
Right.
They can use those closing costs for repairs on the property. They can use those closing costs to buy down their rate. They can use it to offset their closing costs.
Right.
And now, if the seller doesn't want to pay the agent's compensation, a buyer can ask for 2.5%, 3% credit from the seller, and then that buyer can use that money to pay their agent, because the reality is most buyers are probably not going to be able to afford to pay their agent and the closing costs and the down payment.
Yeah, because
right?
ultimately it's going to be looped into the deal one way or another.
Totally.
Right?
Or the worst case scenario, there's a non-represented buyer situation where basically the buyer's like, I don't have the money to pay. The seller on the house I want to buy isn't willing to pay. So I guess I'm going to go in there and do it all by myself. And there are now new terms in the listing agreement that say that the listing agent will make X amount for helping the seller, and then maybe a little bit more depending on what they negotiate if a non-represented buyer comes in. So again, all these contracts have been changed, and we're all dealing with new contracts and new rules and new laws, and every case is unique. But the bottom line is we feel like it's all negotiable, and the best agents are going to find a way to win and help their clients at the deepest level.
The second change is now buyers must sign an agreement, whether non-exclusive or exclusive, agreeing to pay their agent for their duties and job of helping them to find the home. But the big question here now is, can buyers afford to pay them?
This form is mandatory.
Yep.
It doesn't matter if it's a past client. It doesn't matter if it's an online lead. It doesn't matter if this person walks into an open house. As agents moving forward, we are now required by law to have that buyer sign a BRBC. And that's the name of the acronym of the form. That basically, and it's like a scary form too. It's like 5 or 6 pages. It's a lot of legal jargon, but it basically says that this agreement is between the buyer and the agent, whether exclusive or non-exclusive, for a certain period of time, and how much the buyer will pay their agent
For their services.
for their services. So we can go back and forth all day and go, hey, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, we know that the seller is going to pay. We will find a way to get the seller to pay. But at the end of the day, the agreement can feel a bit intimidating because it literally says, I, the buyer, will hire you and I will pay your commission. And if we hold that buyer to that form, the buyer is responsible. And a lot of buyers are freaking out because they're like, no one's ever asked me to sign a form before. Although the buyer form has existed in the past, it wasn't mandatory, and most agents didn't have their buyers sign it. So now this is such a new change for the buyers. There's some doubt and fear.
Yeah, I mean, it can be looked at from all different angles, good, bad, scary. The bottom line is it has to be done regardless. So now it's time to educate the consumer and the buyer and help them understand the different ways that they can go about hiring an agent and what that all looks like and what this form looks like. And that's what we're talking about today. And whether you're scheduling a showing through Zillow, which basically is a just, hey, I'm calling, I'm clicking, I want to just go see this property. There is a form or some form of the form that you have to sign with that agent just to tour the property. So the consumer has to go through it no matter what. And it's a huge shock for most buyers. And although it's supposed to create transparency, we're finding that it's also creating a lot more fear and doubt more than anything else.
Yeah, and again, this form is mandatory. And if we don't use it, we are subject to hefty find.
Yeah.
And so, look, there are some pros and cons, right? I mean, I do think that it's nice for an agent and a buyer to have a mutually beneficial agreement that says you and I are agreeing to work together. Because it is kind of like the wild, wild west. I mean, how many times have you worked with a buyer that said, I want to work with you, and then all of a sudden they ghost you, or you find out that they went into an open house and they bought a property, but you spent 6 months showing them properties and then they just went to another agent, right?
So this helps that.
It's nice to have that certainty as an agent, but it's also very scary for the buyer to have to feel like they're on the hook for such a huge fee. I mean, look, let's just talk like high level. Closing costs on a property purchase is usually around 1.25 to 1.5%. If you're asking for 2.5 or 3% commission, that's 2x what they're already struggling to pay on top of the down payment. So, you know, it's just something that we all have to get used to. I feel like right now it's kind of a shock to most. I think in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, we'll all be a little bit more acclimated to it as we learn how to do it. But yeah, that's kind of what we're dealing with right now.
So the bottom line is there are multiple ways for us as the agents to get paid. We firmly believe, and I stand by this, that 9 times out of 10, we can negotiate that the seller pay our fee through the transaction, whether it's labeled as a commission or labeled as a buyer credit. We see it just as another negotiating point, and for some reason, if we can't get the seller to pay it, we will be completely transparent with the buyer, let them know the situation before they're responsible to pay our fee. So this is the biggest misconception that I think we need to unpack here a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I met with so it's interesting because August 17th happened for one of my clients in between when we were working together, when we started working together 2 months ago versus today. And so I sat with her and I was like, look, moving forward, I need you to sign this document, and here's what it says. And she was a little bit taken back because she's like, well, we've been working together for 2 months, and now you want me to sign this exclusive agreement and agree to pay you this fee? And I'm like, I understand it's now the new law, and whether you work with me or any other agent, ethical agent, you're gonna have to do this. And she's like, well, I'd like to review it, and I'd like to talk to my attorney. And she was very nervous about it all. Now, we've worked through it all, but what I basically told her was this: I know the document says that you will pay me my fee when I help you find a house, but what I want you to know is my goal is to not have you pay me my fee. My goal is to loop it into the transaction, whether I get the seller to pay the fee or I get a credit for you that you can use to pay my fee. I don't want this fee to come out of your pocket. And I think back at when we were dealing with buyers who struggled to even pay their normal closing costs, right? We would say, well, hey, we have a buyer that has a down payment, but they don't have the closing costs, so we need 2% of a credit to pay the closing costs. And a lot of times the agent said, hey, we don't care if you ask for a credit, we just want to make sure that the net to the seller makes sense.
Correct.
And that's exactly what's happening here. If the offer we're writing up is great and we have our compensation lumped into that offer, but the net to the seller is acceptable to them, there should be no issues, right?
Correct.
So do you have any final thoughts?
I think the question is this good or bad for real estate, right? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? I think I'm just gonna go with it's gonna be a change, and the world of real estate and the landscape is evolving and changing. Good agents are going to adapt. They're going to rise above, and they're going to educate the consumer and their clients, and they're going to do an amazing job. Some agents will leave the business, some agents will fail, and
some agents will thrive.
And exactly, some agents will thrive. I think at the end of the day, it's all about having a conversation with your clients, educating them on everything that we just talked about in detail and going over the form with them, and also telling them what you're gonna do for them as their agent.
Well, that's another pro that I really like is a lot of times somebody would call and go, hey, I wanna see this place, can you meet me? And agents just jump in their car and go look. But now it's like, well, look, the laws have changed, the way we do real estate has changed. Can you meet on Zoom? Can you come into the office so I can share with you how real estate is done now? And that's an opportunity for us to say, well, why would you commit to working with us for 3 months when there are 24,999 other agents in this area? Well, this is what we do above and beyond the average agent. And now buyer's agents are going to be forced to express their value proposition to a buyer to get a buyer to say yes, which is going to raise the standard in the industry. So Comment below, let us know what you think. I mean, do you have questions? Are you confused? Are you excited about this? Do you think this is dumb? How do you think it'll change the industry? How does it change your perspective on buying a home or selling a home? We'd really love to know. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe so that Ryan and I can show YouTube that the content we're making is bringing value to you guys, and it'll give us more resources and more time to keep making content that's gonna keep you guys ahead of the curve.